Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the Sales Syndicate podcast. I'm joined by someone that I met at a recent event in Amsterdam, T&W conference in Amsterdam. And it so happened that we actually spoke to one of his colleagues or one of his team to see if they would feature on our podcast episode for that event. But they weren't, let's say, confident enough to jump on the podcast. So Dan stepped in and then showed him how it's done, and we had to get him on the main podcast. We're going to be talking about the psychology behind conversations. Obviously, sales reps spend a lot of their time having conversations, in an ideal world at least. So it should be a very, very good conversation. But I will hand over to Dan to introduce himself and the company before we get going. So over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Jamie. So my name is Daan Matthes. I'm the head of sales at Moss in Amsterdam, so responsible for the Dutch division of Moss. Been in sales now for the past 12 years, almost 13 years. Did a lot of sales team leading, new hire training, sales training in general, and sales coaching. But in the last years, I've specialized myself a little bit in setting up the Dutch market for foreign companies that want to move into the country. And so did this happen 2 years ago with Moss as well. What do we do with Moss? What we have is an all-in-one spend management platform where we try to make it easy for finance departments to handle credit card transactions, reimbursements, and invoices, and automate as much as possible of their work, and hopefully saving them about 60% of the time while doing so.
And those listening or watching might remember Moss or recognize Moss from a recent episode. We had Kerry Ann on the podcast, and that was again like off the back of the trade show. I think I came across Kerry Ann on LinkedIn and managed to squeeze her in before you. So no pressure following Kerry Ann. Her episode went out earlier this week, actually, coincidentally. And I think it's we've had some good feedback on that episode so far. So I think it'll be a battle of the I don't know, do you call yourselves Mossians? Moss? What do you call?
We actually don't have a name for ourselves, strangely enough. No.
Okay, Mossers, I don't know. But anyway, battle of the people from Moss.
It's a very good one. It's very strange, and it'll stick to a lot of people.
Mossians, yeah. Battle of the Mossians. So we'll have to share the performance after. But we had a kickoff call, which we do for all podcasts. And I typically just ask a very open question of what would you like to talk about? You know, whether it's a success story, a failure, a strategy, a top tip. And I think you pretty much straight away knew you wanted to talk about I think something you were passionate about, which is like the psychology behind conversations. So do you want to just give us a very top level overview of what you mean by the psychology behind conversations before we go into a little bit of a more nitty-gritty conversation?
Yeah. So why I instantly responded with the psychology behind the conversation is because a lot of times when people think about sales, they think about just asking some questions and trying to get to a certain outcome. And that outcome, preferably for the salesperson, of course, is always getting that yes. But during a conversation, there are certain little hints that you hear. There's certain little hints that you see in a person as well when you do a video call, for example. And what you want to do is you want to pick on that a little bit more, and you want to deep dive into why somebody's saying a certain thing. Saying no could mean a thousand things, but you need to ask the right questions to get there. And then it becomes like, how do you ask that question? And this is where the psychology behind the conversation comes in. How do you ask a question? Why do you ask it? What's your own feeling behind it? And what does it do for you? And I think there's a lot to uncover for a lot of people by analyzing their own calls, for example, and seeing where the results come from. But also understanding what does it do to another person if I ask a certain question.
Now, is it? Did you study psychology, or is it just like a general thing that you've got interested in over the course of your career?
I got interested in it over the course of my career. I didn't study anything of it. I I'm not really somebody who reads a lot of books, I would say. It was a lot of trial and error. And I noticed that when I had certain days where I felt in a certain way, that my conversation would be very different from the day before. But I would do the same thing. It was the same script. I thought I was doing the same intonation, and the same pitch, as well. So what changed? And then what I noticed at one point was, okay, I actually am more interested on Monday, for example, than I am on a Tuesday. And what does that do to the counterpart in the conversation? And that's when you notice you get very different answers. I jokingly once said, and this is like I think 7 or 8 years ago, I said to somebody who was a little bit nervous on a to get into cold calling. I said, try and do it when you have a hangover, because you really don't care about anybody's opinion. But the only goal you have is have a nice conversation to make your day feel a little bit better. And then you notice that some people really, when they have a hangover and they're calling on a Friday, for example, after some Thursday evening drinks, you notice that they actually genuinely ask questions that are interesting for themselves as well. So the conversation is a lot more relaxed. And this is when I started thinking a lot more about, like, hey, what does it do? How do you change the way that you sound, but also the way that you ask your questions? And this is where I started building on it, but also making a lot of mistakes down the road, to learn from those.
I'm just thinking, I'm hoping one of those mistakes wasn't that person became a clinical alcoholic because
No,
they always had to be hungover to make the best sales calls.
no. It was a wake up call. It was a wake up call. It happened once, I believe. That the person actually had a hangover. But it was a wake up call after that, because the times after that he decided, okay, I do not need to be afraid of anything as long as I have a genuine conversation with somebody, and as long as I don't fake the interest I have. But I should be really careful with how do I state certain questions, and who do I have across from me, and how do I level with that person.
Yeah, I thought we were going to find a hidden tactic of Moss there, where you encourage your employees to drink heavily every single night
No, no.
before work. But
No,
that's
I
why
would, I
it's
would
so.
rather encourage having a healthy lifestyle. We're trying to get people to start running, for example, together as a team. So I think that is a little bit healthier than going drinking together.
100%. We all, well, not all of us, a good number of us play golf, and that's been a big thing for us over the course of the summer. On the topic of health, but anyway, back to psychology of conversations. I think one of the first things that you sort of explained on the kickoff call, or that you went into a bit deeper, was profiling through conversations, of like building a quick profile of the person you're speaking to be able to, you know, understand more about them, their personalities, preferences, and as a buyer to help you. Do you want to just run us through that sort of principle?
Yeah. So when I start talking to somebody, I want to know as much as I can know up front, for example. So you check out LinkedIn, you check out if there's any news publications, for example. That is your basis, and everybody does that, of course. But when you start a conversation, there are certain ways that you can check as well, like who do I have across me, and how do they respond to certain small little triggers. So I am somebody, when I start calling, I put on my call voice, which is a lot higher than I normally talk, and I check what the reaction is to that voice. For example, if I then notice that somebody responds to that negatively, for example, and says, "Why are you calling me?" and goes down in the voice, I will go down as well. So you want to make sure that you really listen, like, how is somebody responding? And if somebody says, "Why are you calling me?" you can make certain assumptions to that as well. And then you can test and trigger them a little bit by saying, "I can imagine that you're very busy right now. Is that true?" And then if they say yes, then it's okay. It's a busy person. So how do I make sure that I follow up in the rest of the conversation by telling that person, for example, I know your time is very valuable. I'll keep it short. Give me 30 seconds. If they say, I'm not too busy, I'm just wondering why you're calling. Okay, you need to give more explanation. It's somebody who probably wants you to be very meticulous in what you explain to them, and no vague descriptions of why you're calling, trying to get into the pitching mode, for example. And that can change the entire beginning of the conversation, but also it gives you about 30 seconds probably to set a little bit of a rapport. Who are we talking to together, for both me and the prospect that I'm talking to as well. I think that is extremely important, to make sure that you hear and you really listen to what somebody says, but also what is the intonation, what are they saying with what they're actually saying. Because as mentioned before, and as everybody in sales usually knows, a no is not per se a no. It can be no, not right now, no, I don't have any time, no, I don't know who you are. And they need more explanation to give you a definite rejection.
Yeah, no, the thing you were talking about, you start high, and if your prospects goes lower, you go lower. I think we had an episode with a couple of guys called Jack and Zach from We Have a Meeting, who are an outbound sales agency, and they spoke about mirroring your prospects working very, very well.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you've got someone who's quite, I don't know, monotone and a bit down in the dumps, they're really not going to respond well to someone who's really, really high pitched and speaking fast and super, super, I don't know, excitable on the phone. It just doesn't seem to resonate because they want to relate themselves to you unconsciously. So that's that's an interesting one. And I guess when you say a no's not necessarily a no, then you're trying to unveil hidden meanings. Like every answer that you said has some sort of meaning or purpose. So how do you begin to try and unveil those hidden messages and like decode almost like these underlying thoughts?
A lot of it is of course experience. So you try it out a lot. What the biggest learning was for me in my entire career is by bluntly asking. For example, one of the most important things, if somebody says no, ask them, okay, why not? It's a very straightforward question. It usually startles people a little bit. They're like, okay, this is so straightforward. Why are you asking me this question? You can hear them thinking like, why are you asking me this question? Sometimes you do get an answer. Other times they're like, I'm just not interested. All right, but you've got more of the sentence already. I'm just not interested. And then you can ask them, why are you not interested? You can start digging deeper there. But in the general conversation, when you hear somebody saying no, um, there there is the intonation behind it. If it's a very irritated no, for example, somebody goes like, "No, I don't want to talk to you right now," uh, it sounds like somebody's in a hurry. It might sound like somebody is irritated because of something that happened. Because when cold calling happens, or when you're in a meeting, for example, and you jump in, you never know what happened before that. The only thing we see is we see a number, we see a point of contact that we want to reach, and then we call up. It might be that 5 minutes ago they lost a loved one and got a call, and they still picked up the phone afterwards. So if you don't know what happened before, you need to unveil a little bit of what happened before. So if somebody says like no, you can ask them, okay, is it a better timing if I call you in 2 days from now? I can imagine you're very busy, or I can imagine it's not the right timing. By constantly trying and going deeper on this and hitting walls and getting very irritated people sometime because you're pushing a lot, what you can notice is you get a lot more answers. And if you pile up all those answers, you write them down for yourself at one point, you will start seeing the patterns in how somebody says no, and that you can combine it with all of the other no's that you got, especially in the beginning of a conversation. And then you can see, okay, this intonation that I heard, 80% of the time, it's because people say that they're too busy right now. So when somebody reacts like that again, you automatically know I need to respond in this way, and then you can start your objection handling and testing that again as well. So all of those mistakes that you make along the way will eventually give you a lot of uh, different kind of ways to handle the objection, but also to get back into the conversation again, or even do different openings when you notice, hey, this might be a wrong timing for that person.
So you alluded to a couple of them there, but what are some of your favorite questions you would ask in follow up to a no?
So sometimes I would even ask if somebody says like, no, I'm not interested, and there's no pitch, nothing, haven't even explained what we're doing. Then I asked them, "What are you not interested in?" Which is a very confronting question, and I'm just not interested in a sales conversation. And then I tell them, okay, then let's not have a sales conversation. Let's have a conversation about the processes that you have in the company and what you are annoyed about. Like, what would you see differently? And then you just go back into that conversation and you tell them, like, I'm not going to do a sales pitch. We can hang up the phone uh, after, let's say, 40 minutes of talking about your processes. I'm not going to tell you what we do at all. I don't mind not pitching. Automatically, the other side, there's a very high chance that they're saying, why would you not pitch? Or they can also say, of course, like, I don't want to have that conversation. I will go deeper. Like, why do you not want to have that conversation? Isn't it important for you to actually improve your job, for example? But I can also imagine you would like to talk about what doesn't go well, and you want to see what the options are. Um, because in the end, every prospect that you speak to has an intrinsic motivation to be good at their own job, and this comes down to that psychology behind it. Like, who are you talking to? You're talking to a professional, especially when it's B2B, that loves their job most likely, or at least the field that they're in, and they want to hear they're doing a very good job. So why not let them talk about it? And if you ask those upfront questions at one point, like, what are you not interested in? Tell me what you would do differently before we hang up the phone. Then you can notice that they're like, okay, but this is like a lot of um, uh, uh, talking yourself up and making sure that you can say how good you are, which compels them to go into the conversation. Then another one that I really like is when somebody says like, no, I don't have any time right now. I'll just ask them, okay, when do you have more time? And they'll go like, well, no, I don't want to have a sales conversation. And then I just ask them a random question, and I go like, all right, no problem. I'll hang up the phone. Just one more question before we hang up. I'm very interested in this. And then I still ask them a question. I ignore the fact that they said no, and I try to pull them into the conversation again. And it can be, for example, if we combine it to Moss, what we do here, I'll ask them just to be 100% sure. How do you handle your receipts normally? Because then I can put that feedback back to our product managers and our engineers. And then they are very often still compelled to answer that question. Why? Because again, they want to talk about how good they do their job. And they're 100% convinced we do not have a better program than what they already bought or what they already built themselves. So you still get them to have a conversation about how good they are, which puts you back into the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. We again the Jack and Zach one episode that we did, and they called it like pattern interrupt essentially. And it's like you said, you're trying to break the pattern of them just saying no because it's a sales call by asking them a question. I think the example Jack and Zach gave was actually just ask them a completely random question that's not even on the topic of like your product and stuff. So I don't know, it might be like, oh no, I'm not interested in a sales call. And like you said, you would go, okay, what's your favorite vegetable?
Yeah,
Or just like something completely
that works,
random like
right?
that.
Like
Yeah,
some
because
people are like, why would you ask that question?
yeah, yeah, and then you go, well, you said you didn't want a sales call, so I just want to know what your favorite vegetable is.
Yeah,
Um, and it's just like to break them out of that I hate all salespeople sort
yeah.
of mindset and break down those barriers. Yeah, you'll have to try the vegetable one and let me know how you get
I
on
am
with
I am going to try it. Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing. It's like people automatically say no. It's a sales call. People are trained to say no. We've got the gatekeepers, of course, who are trained to keep us away from a point of contact, and the actual prospect. But once we bypass those, somebody is still automatically trained to say no because they don't want to have that pitch. But in the end, what everybody wants is a better process within the company. They want to make sure that their work life gets better, and they want to have better products, but nobody wants the hassle of having a sales call. So trying to make it as less of a sales call as is, and trying to be very interested in what they do and how good they are at the job, that makes it, I think, very easy to get into the conversations, and to make sure that somebody actually likes you as well as a conversational partner, and not just go like, okay, you have a nice product, but you need to be that conversational partner with the prospect as well.
And you mentioned there about like automatic responses, and I think we don't tend to think about these like innate unconscious automatic responses that like the example I always used to give, or I give, is when my mum or dad used to shout up and say dinner's ready. I would say what, as if I didn't hear them. But every single time I heard that they said dinner's ready, but I said what, because I don't know, my just unconscious response was what, pardon, even
Yeah,
though I heard the question. And I think a lot of people, when you pick up the phone and you say, oh, it's Dan calling from Moss, have you got 30 seconds, their automatic response is no, sod off. So
yeah.
like, how do you try and pull them out of those automatic, aside from the pattern interrupts that we've just like spoken about, how do you try and get them to engage in the like to think about what they're saying and actually go down this decision tree of, do I want this conversation or do I not, rather than just defaulting to no?
Call it out. That's one of the tactics you have as well. So um we've had conversations, cold calls, where we started just saying instantly like, you're not waiting for this call. You're going to say no probably if I tell you it's a sales call. So I'm going to be very honest. I'm just going to say in 30 seconds what it is, and then after that we hang up the phone. If it's not to your liking, it's not to your liking. Um, it startles most people that you're very honest, and they're like, okay, I'll give you the 30 seconds. But you end with an open question, and they're very compelled to actually answer the question still, because again, you need to make sure the question you ask makes them talk about themselves and not about what you don't want to have the information that can get you to close the deal. You want to have random information why they are so good at their job, for example, and then you're in that conversation again. Sometimes they will say, okay, that's just 30 seconds, that's it, I'm not interested, well, I'll hang up the phone. And then you can go like, all right, nice, thank you very much. That's not an automatic response. It's not an automatic no. Very interested. Why weren't you interested in what I have to say other than that? And then they can say, I am not interested in having a sales call. And then you can get that discussion going again and say, okay, you're not interested in a sales call. What are you interested in? Interested in making your processes better? We can do the vegetable, and say, okay, what is your favorite vegetable then? Let's not have a sales call. Let's have a conversation about what you want to do in your free time. Do you like cooking? Um, I think it's extremely important for the salesperson itself to recognize when it's an automatic no, or when it's an automatic response to a sales call, because that way you can call it out, and when you call it out, somebody will go like, yes, I always automatically say no.
So in a way, you kind of have to not trick them into falsely automatically answering your question, because like you said at this, I don't know, 10 minutes ago, you said someone would say, oh no, I'm not interested, and you went, well, interested in what? I haven't told you what we offer
Yeah,
yet. And that's almost like a tricking them into giving you, well, it's not tricky, but you've caught them in a bluff of, they think they know what you're going to talk about.
yeah, and it might also be something very Dutch, of course, but I think that calling out that somebody is doing something automatically makes them reflect like, yes, I automatically say no. To what am I saying no, actually? Because I don't know what this person is going to say. I just don't like salespeople. Um, and they might feel a little guilty even. And sometimes you can play the guilt card as a salesperson, and you can say, I'm sorry, I'm just doing my job. I'm trying to make sure our company can grow. And that's why I called you. And somebody might feel a little bit guilty by saying like, oh yeah, sorry, I'm always saying no, because I don't like to have these sales conversations. And you want them to be honest why they don't like it, because when your prospect becomes honest about why they don't like having a sales conversation, you can adjust the way that you have your conversation, and you can again make sure that it's a conversation that is tailored to the person that's sitting across from you. Maybe they don't like sales conversations because it bothers them in their work, and then you can ask them a question: hey, what's the best time to call you? What is the time that you want to avoid your work? Is it at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday when you're two hours in and you're like, I really don't want to work today, the weekend should last another day, can we have a conversation then, because I can keep you off your work for 30 minutes if you want to? You crack a little joke about it, and then somebody might at least get back into the conversation with you again.
Yeah, is it though? On the previous episode, we there was this idea or theory, I don't know, opinion that a cold call opener, your only job of a cold call opener, or the only purpose of a cold call opener, is to stop someone saying no. You've just got to bypass that first yes no decision. And I think there was this, our SDR was testing one that he came across on LinkedIn, which was similar to one of the ones you shared actually, and it was, he picked up the phone, he says, hi, it's Aaron calling from Selligence. I'm going to be brutally honest. Give me 30 seconds and you can either slam your phone against a wall at the end, you can either slam your phone against a wall because this is a sales call, or you can give me 30 seconds. And usually they would, something like that, and they would laugh and then say, go on, all right, yeah, go on then. You've made me laugh. I've not heard that one before. Here's your 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The only job of his first 10 or 15 words was to buy himself the opportunity to give that pitch. Whereas I think a lot of people, they assume the first thing they've got to do is hook people to buying the product, which is obviously completely wrong.
Yeah, and that's like, we should never forget we've got people sitting across from us, or having the conversation with us, and with sales it's a little bit of a pitfall where you think I need that person to buy. No, you need to have a conversation with that person, and that person needs to understand that you have something that is of worth for them. But to be able to have that conversation, you need to understand who is that person, what are they about. If you crack a little joke in the beginning and they react very well to that, okay, we're leveling here. I can crack a little joke, and then maybe if I do another one, we can get a little further. If somebody doesn't respond to it, okay, I've got somebody who's way more serious than I am right now. Okay, level with it. And then you go like, okay, I made a little joke, but all jokes aside, let's get to business. You're a very busy person, probably. You make that little assumption, but you call out that assumption as well to verify it. And then you can see who's that person and how do I adjust my conversation. And it's all within that first minute of having the conversation. And also on an AE side, for example, as well, when you start the demo, you haven't met that person before because an SDR booked the conversation. You need to make sure, who do I have sitting across from me? Is it a mom? Is it a dad? Is it somebody who has 10 cats walking in the apartment, for example, when they're working from home? All of that information makes you have a conversation where you level with a person, where you also understand what they're saying, where they're coming from, why they make a certain decision. And I think that is the most important thing within sales always, is make sure that you don't sell the product for just to get a yes, but make sure that a person wants to buy it from you because you make them feel heard.
You spoke a few minutes ago about people, like your buyers, need to feel comfortable. They need to feel like they want to share information about themselves, or they naturally like doing that. How do you go about like creating a comfortable environment for your buyer, as in, like, how do you make them feel more at ease and more likely to open up?
So it depends on per person who does it. For me, for example, I like cracking a joke about myself, making myself a little bit more humble and saying, okay, oh, sorry, I just made this mistake or that mistake, or I make a mistake on purpose and then call myself out on making that mistake. And the reason for doing that is to show, okay, I made a mistake. I'm okay with that. I'm openly saying that was not the right decision. That was a dumb decision, for example. Um, and then making a little joke of myself sometimes, it can be very dangerous though, because you don't want to put yourself too low, but it could also lower barriers for other people. So especially for buyers, when I make a little joke like, oh no, I had this situation, that situation, and I open myself up a little more, they're like, okay, there's a human sitting across from me who says something different than here's my pitch, listen to my pitch, and that's it. Which makes it a little bit easier to have a conversation that is not just a product. Um, you can do it in the intro, for example. So when I do my intro, when I still do some of the larger clients, for example, for Moss, I explain to them where I come from, how I ended up at Moss, but I also always tell them like I used to be a cameraman. I graduated as a cameraman. I ended up in fintech. No clue how I did that. Normally, somebody doesn't go from being very creative to being very precise with numbers. And then I crack a joke and I tell them like, I'm still not very precise with numbers. That's why I love our own app that much. They laugh and they recognize, yes, most people in sales, they do not like numbers. They are very bad with their receipts, for example. And then they know like, okay, there's a human sitting across from me who still makes his own mistakes, even in their own platform sometimes. And that lowers the barrier for them to also tell me what are the mistakes that they make within their day-to-day job, for example, or the things that they struggle with, so I can solve them with our solution, for example.
What you gave us what one or two examples there, but what are some of your top self-deprecating jokes that you use about yourself?
Well, it's a very good one. Um, so one of the ones is that I'm super chaotic. So I do tell in my intro, for example, that I took this job because I used to be the person that when having to hand in reimbursements, for example, I would take my team out to team events, team lunches, and I would tell them, okay, and then I spent 4,000 euros in 6 months on all kinds of events. And then I would look at my bank account and go like, ooh, I am very bad with money. Um, how come? And then I find out that I have 4,000 in reimbursement still, and that's why I took the job. And then they usually ask me, "Oh, are you a lot better right now?" I go like, "No, I'm still missing a lot of money on my bank account. I don't know where it's coming from." So for finance people, that is, of course, because they love having everything very strict in the bookkeeping. For them, it's very nice to like, okay, yeah, so it still doesn't work for you. Um,
So try to be industry specific. So like you're in
yeah,
finance, you say about I don't know bankruptcy as a I
yeah.
don't know like that's probably a bit of a stretch. But like
You need to make it
being in the red
relatable.
or yeah.
Yeah, you need to make it relatable for them. For example, if I would say I'm very bad at administration, and I always forget to send out follow up emails, for example, they're gonna go like, I don't care. I don't want to get your follow up emails, for example. So I try to make it as specific as possible, but I always use actual situations that happen, and then I just try to make a joke out of that one where somebody can relate to it as much as possible. It
Yeah,
also depends on what company it is sometimes.
my go to is something to do with the fact I'm a redhead and I burn easily. Like we're in the summer at the minute, so my go to is the fact that I spend a good amount of money on Fats of 50 to keep me going, and
Yeah,
just taken up golf, and it's ironic because I tend to avoid going outside for 4 hours straight in the sunshine, and now I'm doing it multiple times a week, and
yeah, and
that usually breaks down a few barriers, especially if you're speaking to a fellow redhead.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And that's the thing is like people like making jokes. Everybody does. So people in finance love it. People in marketing love it. People in sales, well, in sales, I think we love cracking jokes about a lot of things. But everybody likes it, and it makes it very relatable if you make a little joke. And if it's self-deprecating, sometimes it can like sometimes you misfire, and the rest of the conversation is going to be very awkward. But I would say 80% of maybe even 90% of the time, people see that you're human and you're trying to have a nice conversation and you're breaking the ice, and they will always appreciate a good joke. or even a very bad one, and they will still laugh at it because it's so bad. And then you can at least have a very open conversation about that. You made a very bad joke. Breaks the ice. You can go into the rest of the conversation, but you also get to know the other person a little bit more about what they like and what they don't like, for example.
So I'm just we've spoken quite heavily about like that initial call then, but I take it these tactics, this like trying to read between the lines, this is something that you're doing on every single call, because you might have a great first call and then they've had a week or two to think about it and they're like, oh, I don't know if I can be bothered with this this follow-up call. So I take it just carries through.
It carries through. So the initial part is where you just start actually like looking into like, okay, who is the other person sitting across from me? So let's take somebody who owns 10 cats, for example. You find out that person owns 10 cats, and then in my follow-up I would ask, how are your cats doing at this moment? I can imagine 10 is a very big struggle with the fall coming in. They must be shedding some hairs by now. um you try opening that conversation up again, and I think in every follow-up you need to make sure that the other person knows that you really listen to what they had to say when it's something personally, if they did open up to you. Because then again, you need to make sure that people that person feels heard, and it can be on the personal level, can be on a professional level. So as much as you probe into the first conversation, like who is that person, what do they like, what do they dislike, bring that all back in all of your follow-up conversations or later up in the conversation as well, to make sure that the other person knows like, hey, Don is not listening so that he can sell something. Don is listening because he's very interested in what I have to say.
So do you have a process for making notes of all these talking points? Do you have like a specific section? Do you asterisk things that you need to refer to again? How do you do that?
I try to always write down one or two sentences where somebody, especially when it's a video call, where somebody lights up and says like, "Hey, this is what I liked," and their eyes go like, hey, "Yes, this is a nice topic, but I don't want to go back into it too much, but it's a nice topic." I'll try to write that one down and go back into that topic again, and ask them again like, "Hey, we had like last time we talked about XYZ, which is unrelated to our product. I was just wondering like, how are you doing right now?" So in our case, for example, I would in a month from now would crack a joke, and if you told me like, I don't want to go out for 4 hours into the sun because they burn easily, it would go like, well, it's like typical fall weather again, so you should be good right now. So are you spending 8 hours a day outside of your house? So you can get back into that conversation again, and it also reminds the other person like, hey, yeah, last time we had a very nice conversation, yeah, we discussed that topic. And I think that is important, to not just write down what did you talk about like on a business wise, but write down who you had in front of you. If it's a very smart person who loves telling about all of the things that they've built within a company, go back into that 100%. Like, go back into like, hey, you told me last time you set up all of these like financial structures within the company that weren't there before. I was thinking over the past week, so interesting. How did you build XYZ, for example? You might not be interested in it, or you might be interested in it, but make that person feel acknowledged, that they did something very good, because otherwise they would never mention it.
I think that's probably one of the more powerful techniques. Like you create this little personal profile or bio about them, and their likes and dislikes, because we've spoken about making people feel comfortable. We've spoken about breaking down those automatic responses,
Yeah,
and I think one of the biggest trends over the last 12 months, and it's only going to increase, is that people like to buy from a trusted advisor, not a
yeah,
sales rep. So if you ask them about these more personable, real life things, then you begin to build trust, which is only going to snowball and help over time. So if you, in the first call that you said you understand they got 10 cats, and then in the second call you talk about the Dyson animal that they've just bought because to cope with all the hair, and then
yeah.
in the next one it's like, okay, what are you buying them all for Christmas? That must be quite expensive. You build this big tree of like profile about that person,
Yeah.
and then they start to see you less as a salesperson, more as a I don't know, like a peer to peer, business
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. Like, reason why most of us love sales is because the conversations that we have. We love getting the results, but we also love sales because we have very good conversations, and we can level with very different people that we normally maybe not even ever meet. You won't meet them at a bar, or you won't meet them at a festival, or randomly in the supermarket, for example. But you do have a chance to have a little glimpse in how somebody else is, which helps you in your personal life again, by getting to understand new people. If you meet new friends or friends of friends, you can apply all of these tactics again by showing interest in them, and understanding who they are in conversations, by cracking a little joke when you meet new people, or a self-deprecating joke works very well meeting new people sometimes as well. um, and I think this is where um, the new buying, I would say, it will be going to as well, because you see a very big shift going from how do we sell. Like cold calling used to be, hey, do you want to call? No. Okay, next one, next one, next one. And I see it within my own team as well. We've got people that call the POC 3, 5, 4 times, you name it, but they have very open conversations. They hang up, haven't sold anything, just go like, oh yeah, no, I'll send you the email, read through it again. Next week they'll call up and they said like, oh yeah, last time you were very busy. What were you busy with? Have you read my email? And they gather a bit more information. And 2 weeks later, they'll call again with a little bit more information again, have the same conversation. And then the whole buying has become very easy, because somebody knows like, oh, he's called 4 times, hasn't sold me anything, interested in what you do. Ah, that's actually a very good solution. Yeah, we'll have a conversation with you. And but it makes people feel trusted, because you have the feeling like you're talking to an actual person that is interested again, uh, in you as a person, but as a professional as well.
Yeah, the someone I was speaking to, I think it was yesterday actually for the podcast, spoke about. I think it's an Americanism. I think it's an American phrase, but they spoke about commission breath, which is this thing where you buyers can smell your commission breath. Like if you're
Yeah,
just on a call and all you're thinking about is, oh, this is $3,423 in commission. I got to get this deal.
yeah.
People can smell it through the screen, that they know exactly what you're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. I always tell, especially when I have to train new hires, or people that are only just started in sales. I would always tell them like, try and pitch in the way that you're in the kitchen, at a kitchen table with somebody at a party, who asks you, "What do you do for a living? What does your company do?" And always explain it in that way, and always pitch it in that way as well, because when you're at a party and you explain to people what you do, everybody goes like, "Oh yeah, that sounds really good. I can imagine there's a very good market for that, or I can see that work in our company." Because that's when they're not being sold. That's when you're just explaining what you do, and people are starting to sell themselves, because they are painting this picture in their head, going like, "Yeah, I've had that problem in our company," or "Yeah, I want that solved." If you're uh, trying to get a deal in, you'll have that commission breath, and people are going to smell like, you're trying to close a deal. You're not trying to give me a solution. You're trying to close a deal. And it's very different for the buyer. The whole experience is extremely different, because you're not interested in who's sitting across from you. You're interested in getting more money.
You spoke about your team, training your team. So how do you well, you said you 12 years, right? So 12 years,
Yeah.
you've learned about a lot of like good things, bad things, mistakes, patterns of things working. How do you try and teach it when you don't have 12 years? Because obviously you want your team to upscale as quickly as possible. So how do you begin to coach some of these tactics?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Hoping that the team will listen at one point to the podcast as well. Of course, I think teaching this and training this is one of the most difficult things there is. Let's be very honest, because you need to very quickly train your own personal listening skills, but also you need to train your sight into people, and you need to discover how do you actually make the right assumption when you hear somebody saying something, because you don't have 8 years of mistakes to really listen to it. One of the tips I often give new starters is call a lot of help desks, and then try and ask for a lot of random stuff that they cannot fix for you, for example, but do it in a very flirty, salesy kind of way, and try and level as much as possible with the other person at the other end of the call center, because customer services are usually call centers, especially when it's for your mobile phone company or your internet company, and trying to get them to do something that is out of the normal scope. You can do that by asking them questions. How are they doing? How is their day going? And you can learn very quickly off the job, because you can do that at home, how people respond to certain things. And that's how it's easily trainable, or at least you can train yourself very quickly, because um, working in a call center is usually very stressful, and it's very, like, you've got a 3 minute a service level that you need to get, and you don't have room to actually do some chit chatting. So if you manage to do that, and you manage to learn somebody, or get yourself educated on somebody's personality within those 3 minutes that they have their service level, it gives you a lot of pressure and a lot of information in a very short amount of time, which then helps in the next conversation.
That's an interesting one. I've not heard of that tactic or method. What's your thoughts on, because you can teach people how to use a CRM, you can teach people how to use outreach sequences. Do you think there's some theory behind if you hire people who are just nice, good talkers who know how to hold a conversation and actively listen? So you hire a personality rather than a sales skill set. Do you think there's some method behind that, in that if you hire the right person, then they can easily upskill in the areas of, CRM and things like that, but they're naturally going to be able to have a good conversation already?
I'm a 100% believer in that. I love hiring from the hospitality industry, for example, because they constantly have conversations with customers, whether it's in a hotel or in a bar or in a restaurant. What you need to do is you need to sell. You need to sell the image of being there and having a good time. So when you go out to a pub, for example, or you want to get a pint of beer, you go to the bar and you ask for a pint of beer. That person on the other side of the bar has to give that to you with a smile, need to ask you, how are you doing? Are you enjoying yourself a little bit? Because they want you to come back 15 minutes, 20, 30 minutes later and order another pint. That's their selling. So they know if they can get you engaged into being at the bar, for example, or at the restaurant, that they'll get a lot more turnover from that.
It's
So
interesting. I've always found that you can tell the people who have never had a proper job before graduating uni,
yeah,
like, or college, or whatever you want to call it. Like, you've got people coming out of uni, college at 21,
yeah,
who have never held a retail job or a hospitality job, for various reasons. Maybe they were doing sports, so they didn't have any time. Maybe they were doing something like law, or,
yeah,
or whatever. Um, but you can immediately tell the people who have never been forced into having conversations with complete strangers, who are quite often not very nice in
yeah,
hospitality. They raise their voice. They complain, all that sort of stuff, and you can immediately spot those people who have never had to deal with that.
yeah, yeah. And that's why I love them so much, because the thing is they can hold very good conversations. They know how to uphold themselves in a conversation that is awkward. They also know how to handle somebody who's very angry, and they can let it slide off them. Something might stick every now and then, of course, but they have so much experience having conversations that it's so much easier. Like, I'll learn them the tools. That's an easy one. That's like the least amount of time and effort, I would say, to do that. But getting somebody to have these conversations and this motivation to learn the other person on the other side is so much easier when that person had a job where they already do this on a continuous basis. And in a restaurant, when you're serving somebody, or a whole restaurant, for example, you've got 10 hours of smiling, being happy, and making sure you get a tip, because that's what you want at the end of your day. You want to have nice tips. So you need to sell yourself as an image. And that means that you need to be interested in your customers. And if you're not, and you can bring it up, there's no tips. And then the job is also not that much fun.
So I think that's a very, very good tip to finish on, actually, is that some of the best sales reps have worked in hospitality
Yeah.
or retail. I think that's a very good one. It's definitely one that I'll mention to our head of sales when he's looking at hiring again, is try and find someone who's working in hospitality, because they're going to be good talkers, good people. One last question for you. Podcast and nominate we've been doing recently. So who do I need to get on the podcast next, and why?
So I'm not sure if you've reached out already. So we in the Netherlands also have, in Amsterdam, we have this sales sessions, as we call it. And I think you reach out to Chris already from
I
Sales
think
Sessions.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, that
I
would
think
be a
so.
very good one.
I think I've got him. I think I've got him booked in.
Okay, yeah. So all three of the gents from Sales Sessions are extremely knowledgeable. They've got a lot of insights. Also very vulnerable about what you can do wrong, for example, and how you can learn from that as well. So I would say that's Matthias, Tim, and Chris from Sales Sessions. Uh, 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 all three of them are gems to talk to. Yeah.
And given that we initially met at a trade show and one of your team was not confident enough to speak to us, do you have any other Mossians that that you think would be good on a podcast?
There's a lot of them that I think would be very good. The ones that are that want to come on the podcast, that's a different question. I would say also from the UK team, we've also got Helen, who is very, very, very knowledgeable and very good. That's a very good addition as well. And then we have in the German team, we've got some extremely skilled people in there as well. And I think Lucy Hunt in the German team would be probably a good one to reach out to as well.
Cool. Right, I've just jotted all those down, so I'll we'll follow up after on that. But look, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a very interesting conversation about sort of reading between the lines and picking up on these underlying messages and psychology and things. And I think there's definitely some good little tips to take away out of that. So fingers crossed those listening or watching have enjoyed it. If you have, please like a very high review. And we will catch you in the next episode. So thanks again, Dan, for joining us.
Thank you very much for all the time, Jamie.